The transport shuttle smelled like recycled failure and broken ambitions. Owen Blackwell pressed his forehead against the viewport, watching stars that didn't care about his existence drift past in their infinite indifference. 6 hours he'd been wedged between a maintenance tech whose snoring could wake the dead and a window showing nothing but void. 6 hours to contemplate the trajectory of a career that had peaked at 26 and been in freefall ever since. His assignment papers sat heavy in his jacket pocket. Digital files don't actually weigh anything, but dread has mass all its own. Outpost Zenith materialized from the darkness like a cosmic joke someone had welded together from spare parts and desperate optimism. The station resembled a wheel that had given up halfway through, becoming circular, bristling with sensor arrays that pointed in every direction as if it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be watching. Which Owen supposed was accurate. You don't send people to monitor empty space because you expect them to find something. The docking procedure took 18 minutes of careful maneuvering, while the pilot maintained a steady stream of creative profanity. Owen made mental notes. If nothing else, isolation would expand his vocabulary. When the airlock finally cycled open with a hiss that sounded almost accusatory, Owen grabbed his duffel and stepped into his new reality. The air tasted metallic, processed through systems that had been recycling the same molecules for longer than he'd been alive. Commander Raina Moss waited in the arrival bay. She was compact, sharp-eyed, with silver hair, cropped close to her skull in defiance of both gravity and vanity. She looked Owen up and down with the expression of someone evaluating furniture at a warehouse where all the good pieces had already been sold. "Blackwell," she said, "not a question. A confirmation of inventory." "Yes, ma'am. Reporting for duty?" "Enthusiastic. That'll last approximately 48 hours." She turned and started walking without checking if he followed. Station operates on a 26-hour cycle because the previous commander had a sense of humor. You'll adjust or you won't. Either way, the universe keeps turning. Owen jogged to keep pace, his duffel banging against his hip. The corridors were narrow, painted in a shade of beige specifically engineered to crush the human spirit. Exposed conduits ran along the ceiling, humming with the sound of recycled everything. Surveillance rotation. Moss continued navigating turns without hesitation. Sector 14 Zeta. You'll be monitoring absolutely nothing interesting because if anything interesting happened out here, they'd send someone more important than you. And the truth of it settled in Owen's chest like cold weight. Your quarters are shared. Before you complain, everyone's quarters are shared. We've got 47 personnel and 32 cabins. Mathematics is cruel. I understand, ma'am. You'll be bunking with Lyra. Moss stopped at a door marked 17B and pressed her palm to the access panel. She's your partner. Living quarters shifts everything. Try not to make it weird. The door slid open and Owen's prepared speech about professional conduct evaporated somewhere between his brain and his mouth. The woman standing in the center of the small cabin was human in every respect except for her ears, which rose to elegant points that added perhaps 3 inches to her height. She was arranging small potted plants on a shelf with the concentration of someone defusing a bomb, and when she turned to face him, her expression suggested she found his presence only marginally more interesting than the soil she'd been handling. Dark eyes, unreadable. Sharp features that might have been beautiful if they weren't currently arranged in something close to hostility. "Lyra, your new roommate has arrived." Moss delivered this introduction with the enthusiasm of someone reading warranty terms. "Owen, this is Lyra Venn. You'll work surveillance together, eat together, and probably drive each other insane together. Welcome to Outpost Zenith." She departed before Owen could formulate any of the 17 questions suddenly crowding his mind. Lyra wiped her hands on her pants, leaving streaks of dark soil, and tilted her head in a gesture that was either curious or predatory. Her pointed ears caught the ambient light. "Problem human." Her voice carried an accent that turned the words into music, though the sentiment was decidedly unmusical. Owen became acutely aware of the cabin's dimensions. 2 sleeping pods were mounted to opposite walls barely 3 feet apart. A shared workspace occupied the center, currently dominated by Lyra's botanical collection. A single refresher station was visible through a partially open door. Privacy, it seemed, was a concept the station's designers had read about but never personally experienced. "No problem," he managed. "Just didn't expect a roommate with distinctive features." She smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. "I didn't expect a human who stares like he's never seen basic anatomical variation." We're going to have so much fun together. She returned to her plants, dismissing him as thoroughly as if he'd ceased to exist. Owen stood in the doorway, duffel still in hand, and wondered if the next transport back to civilization was still docked. The answer he discovered later was no. The transport wouldn't return for 6 weeks. He was trapped. Day 3, Owen woke to a sound that made his molars vibrate. His sleep-fogged brain took several seconds to identify the source. Lyra standing at the workspace calibrating a sensor array while making a noise that resided somewhere between humming and industrial machinery, achieving sentience. Except humming was too gentle a word. It was more like she had swallowed a theremin, and it was trying to escape through her sinuses at frequencies that bypassed his ears and attacked his skeleton directly. "Do you have to do that?" he groaned, pressing his pillow over his head. The vibration stopped. "Do what?" "That sound, the one that makes my teeth hurt." "I'm not making any sound." She turned back to the sensor array. Immediately, the vibration resumed, drilling into his skull like a particularly musical migraine. Owen sat up, abandoning any hope of additional sleep. His pod's chronometer read 0547 station time, which translated to an hour that shouldn't exist according to every circadian rhythm his body possessed. The 26-hour cycle was destroying him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He'd fallen asleep during yesterday's shift. Twice. Once while actually speaking to Commander Moss, which had gone over exactly as well as expected. "You really can't hear it?" he asked, swinging his legs out of the pod. Lyra glanced at him. One elegantly pointed ear twitched. "I hear 14 distinct frequencies in this room right now, including the power coupling behind that wall panel, vibrating at 2.3 hertz below optimal. You're breathing and something in your digestive system that suggests you shouldn't have trusted yesterday's protein synthesis." "Which specific sound is bothering you?" "The one coming out of your face." "Ah," she returned to her work. "That's ultrasonic. Your species can't perceive it." "My species is perceiving it just fine, and my species would like it to stop." "Your species is being dramatic." But the humming ceased, replaced by a silence that somehow felt smug. Owen stumbled to the refresher station, which was barely large enough for a human to turn around in. The sonic shower had 2 settings, insufficient and mild assault. He'd learned to appreciate the distinction. When he emerged, Lyra had rearranged the entire workspace. Again, the plants had migrated to different positions according to some pattern he couldn't fathom. Yesterday, they'd been ordered by height, the day before by leaf pattern. Today, they seemed organized by how much they offended geometric sensibility. "Did the plants do something wrong?" he asked, pulling on his uniform. "I'm optimizing their exposure to the full spectrum lamp based on photosynthetic efficiency and growth patterns." They looked terrified. "They're plants, Owen. They don't have central nervous systems." "Tell that to the fern. It's definitely having an existential crisis." The corner of Lyra's mouth twitched. Owen counted it as a small victory. Their shift began at 700, which involved taking the lift to the observation deck and settling into adjacent stations that made the cabin's proximity seem spacious by comparison. The monitoring equipment was standard fleet issue, which meant it was approximately 15 years out of date and held together by spite and improvised repairs. Owen's console flickered every 17 minutes, like clockwork. "Sector 14 Zeta," Lyra announced to the empty room. "Population 0. Interesting astronomical phenomena 0. Likelihood of literally anything happening approaching 0 asymptotically. You forgot reason for monitoring. Also 0, that's implied." She began running diagnostic protocols with the efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times to care. "Although I should mention there's a 0.003% chance of detecting dark matter fluctuations, which would revolutionize physics as we understand it." Should I be excited? You should be bored. The chances of winning the star system lottery while being struck by lightning on a planet with no atmosphere are statistically higher. Owen settled into his chair and began his own diagnostics. The console's flicker seemed more aggressive today. "How long have you been stationed here?" he asked. 14 months, 3 weeks, approximately 6 hours. She glanced at him, those dark eyes unreadable. "But who's counting?" "Someone with a calendar and basic mathematical competency." "You're wondering why I'm here." Owen's hands stilled on his keyboard. "I'm wondering why anyone's here. This station monitors nothing. We're basically very expensive decorative objects." "I volunteered." The words hung in the recycled air between them. "You volunteered for this My planet's participation in the Federation requires personnel contribution. I requested the most remote posting available. She said it casually, but something in her voice suggested layers he wasn't qualified to excavate. Seemed preferable to serving on a ship full of people who'd spend every meal asking to touch my ears. When people actually, every single time, oh, are they sensitive? Can you hear better than us? Do they move? She demonstrated each question with increasingly aggressive finger-pointing at her own ears, as if I'm a curiosity instead of a surveillance technician with better qualifications than most of the humans I've encountered. For what it's worth, Owen said carefully, I haven't asked to touch them. You've thought about it. He opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it. Okay, yes, but I've successfully repressed the urge. Progress. She almost smiled again, then frowned at her console. Your station's about to flicker. How do you... The screen flickered. That's disturbing. It's on a predictable cycle. I've been listening to the power fluctuation for 6 months. 17-minute intervals plus or minus 40 seconds accounting for the station's rotation and generator load. You can hear the power fluctuation. I can hear everything, Owen. Something in her voice softened just slightly. It's both a blessing and a curse. Mostly a curse when you're sleeping and making that grinding sound with your teeth. I don't grind my... He stopped. Do I really like you're trying to pulverize diamonds? I've considered filing a noise complaint, but Commander Moss would probably just assign us a smaller cabin out of spite. They fell into silence, monitoring empty space for phenomena that wouldn't occur. After exactly 17 minutes, Owen's console flickered right on schedule. Lyra's ear twitched in what might have been satisfaction. Week 2 bled into Week 3 with the inexorable slowness of paint drying in vacuum. Owen stopped trying to fight the 26-hour cycle and surrendered to it. His body existed in a state of perpetual mild confusion, never quite sure if it was supposed to be awake or asleep. He learned to nap during shift changes, stolen 15-minute increments of unconsciousness in storage closets and empty corridors. He learned other things too. Lyra rearranged the plants according to a 7-day rotation that he eventually mapped on his personal tablet. Height, color, leaf pattern, photosynthetic efficiency, soil moisture, needs distance from viewport, alphabetical by scientific name. On day 8, the cycle repeated. She hummed at ultrasonic frequencies when she was concentrating, lower frequencies when she was anxious, which happened more often than her carefully controlled expression suggested. She watched him sleep. Not every night, but often enough that he'd started waking to find her sitting cross-legged on her pod, studying him with that same intense focus she applied to sensor calibration. The first time he caught her, she'd said, conducting an observational study on human sleep patterns, specifically the variations in your teeth grinding frequency correlated with dream sorrows and dietary choices. That's a deeply unsettling way to say yes. I find directness overrated. But she kept doing it, and Owen found he didn't actually mind. There was something almost companionable about it, being seen even in sleep, being interesting enough to study. The food synthesizer continued its slow descent into malevolent consciousness. Owen had requested coffee and received something that resembled motor oil mixed with regret. Lyra had named it the spite machine, and the name stuck. It knew what you wanted and gave you the opposite out of pure malice. Can we fix it? Owen asked one morning after receiving green bubbling liquid instead of tea. We've tried. It's become sentient enough to resist repair, but not sentient enough to be useful. It's basically achieved teenage consciousness. Lyra demonstrated by requesting water and receiving what appeared to be carbonated sludge. They'd started eating meals together not by design, but by default. The communal dining area was too crowded, too loud with other people's conversations. The cabin was quieter, more private. Owen told her about Earth, about autumn forests where trees turned colors the synthesizer couldn't replicate even if it tried. Golds and reds that looked like beauty instead of destruction. Lyra told him about Viridian, about bioluminescent twilight forests that sang in frequencies his ears couldn't hear, about architecture that grew instead of being built structures that hummed with organic life. You miss it, Owen said one night, watching her face in the dim cabin lighting. Catastrophically. She smiled, but it was edged with something sharp. Isn't that ridiculous? I volunteered to leave. I wanted distance, and now I'm sitting in a metal box telling a human about things I can never go back to. Not really. You can't return to places once you have left them. They change or you change. and the connection breaks. Maybe the connection doesn't break, Owen offered quietly. Maybe it just gets longer, more flexible. She looked at him, then really looked at him, and something shifted in the air between them. Philosophy at strange hours, she said softly. We've definitely lost our minds. But she didn't look away. Owen fell asleep that night thinking about the distance between people and how small it could become in a cabin this size. Day 27, week 4. The alarm didn't sound like an alarm. It sounded like a scream translated through malfunctioning electronics. Owen jerked awake, his head colliding with the pod's ceiling hard enough to see stars that had nothing to do with the viewport. Emergency lighting bathed the cabin in red, turning everything into a scene from a particularly pessimistic art film. Hull breach section 12. Lyra was already out of her pod, pulling on her boots with movements so efficient they looked choreographed. Micrometeorite impact. We need to seal the emergency bulkheads before half the station decompresses into the void. Owen's brain was still trying to process the concept of being awake. What time? Time to move human. She tossed him his boots. They hit him in the chest with enough force to restart his cardiovascular system. Emergency protocols. You did read the emergency protocols. I skimmed them. Fantastic. Try not to die. She was already at the door pulling an emergency respirator from the wall mount. The station shuddered. Somewhere distant, metal groaned like it was reconsidering its life choices. The corridor was chaos. Personnel ran in directions that seemed random, but probably weren't shouting coordinates and technical jargon Owen's sleep-deprived mind couldn't parse. The red emergency lighting made everyone look like they were starring in their own personal apocalypse. Commander Moss's voice crackled through the intercom calm in the way that suggested either supreme confidence or complete resignation to fate. All personnel emergency stations. Hull breach in Section 12 Alpha. Automated seals failed. Manual override required. Of course, the automated seals failed, Lyra muttered, navigating the corridor with Owen stumbling behind her. This station's held together with optimism and outdated firmware. They reached the emergency locker. Lyra started pulling equipment, magnetic boots, emergency patches, a portable atmosphere generator that looked like someone had built it from spare parts and prayer. She shoved half of it at Owen. Section 12 is 3 bulkheads away, she said, checking a handheld monitor that showed the station's status in colors Owen assumed meant bad things. Pressure's dropping fast. We seal the bulkheads, we save 40% of the station. We don't, we all get very intimate with vacuum. Encouraging. Owen managed to get his magnetic boots activated. They felt like wearing shoes made of duty and regret. Have you done this before? Twice. Once was a drill, once wasn't. She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something other than sardonic detachment in her eyes. Fear, carefully controlled but present. Stay close to me, she said. Do exactly what I say. Don't be heroic, don't be creative, and if I tell you to run, you run. The first bulkhead was already closing when they reached it, hydraulics screaming as the massive door ground toward shut. Lyra dove through the gap. Owen followed his magnetic boots, making him clumsy. The door sealed behind them with a boom he felt in his teeth. The pressure differential made his ears pop viciously. 2 more, Lyra said, already moving. The corridor ahead was darker, emergency lighting struggling. Owen's monitor showed atmosphere bleeding away, a red countdown suggesting they had maybe 8 minutes before this section became uninhabitable. The second bulkhead was stuck halfway, emergency systems flashing warnings in 3 languages, and possibly one that was just angry beeping. Lyra dropped to her knees beside the manual override panel, pulling tools from her belt with the speed of a stage magician. Panels fried, she said, prying off the cover. Exposed wiring sparked in the dim light. I need to bypass the safety protocols and trigger manual closure. Can you do that? I'm about to find out. She started pulling wires, rerouting connections with her bare hands. Owen watched the pressure gauge drop. 6 minutes. Tell me something, Lyra said, not looking up from the panel. Keep me distracted. Distracted from what? From the fact that if I connect the wrong wires, this panel will electrocute me with enough voltage to make my hair stand up permanently, which would really ruin my aesthetic. Your aesthetic is angry botanist. I'm not sure it can be ruined. 5 minutes. Back on Earth, I had a cactus once. Owen said, his voice tight. Killed it in 3 weeks. How do you kill a cactus? They're designed to survive neglect. I overwatered it, gave it too much attention. Hey, 4 minutes. Seemed like a metaphor for my entire life, honestly. Tragic. Lyra connected two wires. Sparks erupted from the panel. She didn't flinch. Though it explains why you're here, they send the overachieving failures to places like this. People who tried too hard at the wrong things. What's your excuse? I'm exactly where I want to be. She connected another wire. The bulkhead shuddered. Nowhere, with no one, monitoring nothing. The bulkhead suddenly lurched into motion, grinding closed with a sound like the universe clearing its throat. Perfect. They ran for the final bulkhead. Owen's magnetic boots made him feel like he was running through molasses. 3 minutes. The corridor was almost dark now, emergency lighting reduced to a faint red glow. Lyra's breathing was steady beside him. His own sounded like he was auditioning for an emphysema awareness campaign. The final bulkhead was already closing, gap narrowing with each second. 2 minutes. Lyra grabbed Owen's arm. He felt the strength in her grip, felt her pull him forward faster than his own legs could manage. They hit the gap together, squeezing through with inches to spare. The door sealed behind them with a finality that suggested the universe had used up its allotment of second chances. Owen collapsed against the wall, his heart attempting to exit through his ribcage. Lyra stood beside him, barely winded, checking her monitor with professional detachment. "Breach contained," she said. "Station stable. We're not dying today." "Good," Owen managed between gasps. "Dying would really mess up my schedule." She looked at him then, really looked at him. Her hand found his in the darkness. Her fingers laced through his with a certainty that felt nothing like accident. "We survived together now," she whispered. And Owen understood that something fundamental had changed between them, sealed as surely as the bulkheads behind them. In the red emergency lighting, with alarms still echoing in distant corridors and his heart still trying to escape his chest, Lyra's hand in his felt like the only solid thing in the universe. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for pulling me through. Thank you for the cactus story." Her grip tightened. Distraction worked. They stayed like that, hands intertwined, until Commander Moss's voice came through the intercom announcing all clear. When they finally made their way back to cabin 17B, neither of them let go until they absolutely had to. Owen lay in his sleeping pod that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to Lyra's breathing from 3 feet away. Everything had changed. He just didn't know yet if that was terrifying or the best thing that had ever happened to him. Possibly both. Week 5 arrived with the inevitability of entropy. Owen found himself standing in Commander Moss's office, a space barely larger than a storage closet, watching her scroll through data with the focused intensity of someone reviewing quarterly earnings that had come up short. "Your performance during the hull breach was exemplary," she said without looking up. "Quick thinking, followed protocols. Didn't panic when most people would have. Lyra did most of the work, ma'am. Lyra's been doing most of the work for over 14 months. I'm talking about you." Moss finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You know why you're really here, Blackwell?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Routine rotation. Owen said the words automatic. Rehearsed. The lie he'd been telling himself for 4 weeks. "That's what your assignment paper said, not what your psychological profile said." She turned her monitor toward him. His file flagged in red. Keywords jumped out: isolation tendency, self-sabotage, patterns, authority conflict stemming from ethical rigidity, potential for rehabilitation through perspective shift. Owen's chest tightened. "You didn't get sent here as punishment," Moss continued quietly. "You got sent here as intervention. Someone in personnel thought maybe what you needed wasn't a reprimand. What you needed was time, space, distance from whatever you were running from." "I wasn't running. You requested remote posting." Moss cut through his protest like a blade through fog. "After you refused to sign off on the Titan weapons integration project. After you filed 14 separate ethics complaints. After you made yourself professionally radioactive to everyone who mattered." She leaned back. "You didn't get exiled, Blackwell. You exiled yourself. I just provided the destination." The words sat in Owen's throat, refusing to form coherent response. "Did Lyra know?" he finally managed. Moss's expression softened just slightly. "Just enough. I showed her your file before you arrived, asked if she'd be willing to help orient a colleague who might be struggling with some things. She said yes." A pause. She's been exactly where you are, running from expectations she couldn't meet, standards she couldn't live up to. She understood. Owen left the office feeling like the station's artificial gravity had just increased by half. That night, he confronted Lyra in their cabin. She was watering her plants, moving between them with the careful precision of ritual. The fern had grown a new leaf, the small victory she'd been working toward for weeks. You knew, Owen said. Not a question. She didn't turn around. Knew what about my file, my psych profile, that I was sent here as some kind of rehabilitation project. Lyra set down her watering can with deliberate care. Yes, simple, direct, no deflection. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to figure it out yourself. She finally turned to face him. Because being told you're broken doesn't help. Discovering you're not as broken as you thought does. I'm not your project, Lyra. No, Violet. Her voice was soft but firm. You're not. You're my roommate, my partner, my... She hesitated, and in that pause, Owen heard all the things she couldn't quite say. Moss asked if I'd help. I said yes. Not because I thought you needed fixing. Because I thought maybe we could understand each other. Owen sank onto his sleeping pod. The anger that had been building drained away, leaving only exhaustion. I sabotaged my own career, he said quietly. The Titan Project. It was cutting edge, career-making. And I walked away because they wanted to weaponize technology that could have saved lives, fed people, changed everything. He looked at his hands. I thought I was being principled. Turns out I was just being scared. Scared of what? Success, responsibility, the weight of mattering. The confession tasted bitter. Easier to fail on my own terms than succeed on someone else's. Lyra crossed the small space between them and sat beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her through his uniform. I was top of my class on Viridian, she said after a long moment. Academic honors in astrophysics, xenobiology, quantum mechanics. Every professor telling me I'd changed the Federation's understanding of the universe. Her pointed ears twitched unconscious movement, and all I could think was how much I wanted them to stop looking at me, stop expecting, stop waiting for me to be brilliant. So you volunteered for the most remote posting in the galaxy. So I volunteered for the most remote posting in the galaxy, she echoed, where nobody knew my test scores or my potential or my family's reputation, where I could just be Lyra, the surveillance technician who talks to plants and makes ultrasonic noises. Owen's hand found hers between them on the pod's edge. Her fingers were cool, slender. They fit between his like they'd been designed for it. We're quite a pair, he said. Catastrophically dysfunctional, Lyra agreed. Maybe that's okay. Maybe it is. They sat like that until the station's cycle shifted and the lighting dimmed for night phase. Neither of them moved to their separate pods. Week 6 bled into Week 7, and Owen discovered the comfortable rhythm of proximity. He learned that Lyra hummed in lower frequencies when she was content, that she organized plants by emotional attachment on days when she was feeling homesick, that she watched him sleep not out of clinical curiosity, but because, as she finally admitted his presence, made the silence feel less empty. He learned that her ears twitched when she was amused but trying not to show it, that she had memorized 17 different variations of his teeth, grinding patterns, and could predict his stress levels with disturbing accuracy, that she took her tea at precisely 93 degrees. Celsius, no hotter, no cooler. Small things, insignificant details. They became the architecture of something larger than either of them had planned. The Spite machine continued its campaign of culinary terrorism. Owen requested orange juice one morning and received what appeared to be carbonated regret in liquid form. Lyra patted the machine's side panel like it was a misbehaving pet. It's evolving, she said with something close to pride. Last week it just gave us the wrong thing. Now it's getting creative about how wrong it can be. Should we be concerned it's developing a sense of humor? Only if it starts laughing at its own jokes. The machine beeped, once, deliberately. They looked at each other. We're doomed, Owen said. Completely, Lyra agreed. But she was smiling, and Owen realized he'd memorized the exact geometry of that smile, the way it softened the sharp angles of her face, the way it made her eyes less guarded. He was in trouble. The realization settled in his chest with the weight of inevitability. Week 9, Day 63, 0347, station time. Owen woke to find Lyra sitting at the viewport silhouetted against stars that had been dead for millennia, but still sent light across impossible distances. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. She didn't startle, had probably heard him wake up, heard his breathing change, heard his heart rate increase in the way she could apparently hear everything. "Come here," she said. "I want to show you something." Owen joined her at the viewport. The space was small enough that their shoulders touched arms pressed together in the narrow frame. There, she pointed to a region of space that looked exactly like every other region of space. Darkness punctuated by distant fire. "See that cluster? The pattern." Owen stared until his eyes watered, and then he saw it. A constellation of stars forming something almost geometric. Too precise to be random. "Is that natural?" "I don't know." Her voice was soft, almost reverent. "I've been watching it for 8 months. Same position, same configuration, not in any official star charts, not in any survey data, just existing where nothing should be that organized." "Have you reported it?" "To whom?" She pulled up a star chart on her tablet, comparing it to the viewport. "Commander Moss, who'd file it under anomalies to investigate, never Federation Science Council, who'd send it to committee and forget about it. We're on a station that exists purely to justify budget allocations, Owen. Nobody cares what we see out here." She zoomed in on her tablet. The stars became distinct points of light, each one a furnace burning across unimaginable distances. "Sometimes I think that's why I like it," she continued. "Out here I can see things that don't have to mean anything. They just get to exist, no expectations, no purpose beyond being beautiful." Owen looked at her profile in the faint glow from the screen, the elegant line of her jaw, the way starlight caught in her dark eyes. "Tell me about Viridian," he said. "The real parts, not the travel brochure version." She was quiet for a long moment. "The forest glow," she finally said. "Bioluminescence in patterns that shift with seasons. Blues and greens and colors your language doesn't have words for because your eyes can't perceive them. At night, which is most of the time, everything looks like you're walking through an ocean made of light." Her ears twitched unconscious memory. And the sounds, frequencies that tell stories if you know how to listen, wind through structures that sing. "My mother used to take me to the residence gardens when I was small, ancient trees that hummed in harmonics. You could feel it in your bones, in your blood, like the whole planet was breathing and you were part of that breath." "You miss it," Owen said quietly. "I'm forgetting it." The confession came out raw. 16 months here, and I'm losing the frequencies. The language I used to hear in 17 layers, Owen. Now it's down to 15, maybe 14. The higher ranges are just gone, like a color fading from memory until you can't remember if it was ever really there. Her hand trembled on the tablet. "What if I go back and it's not home anymore? What if I've been away so long that I don't fit there either? What if I'm just suspended between worlds, belonging nowhere?" Owen took the tablet from her hands and set it aside. He pulled her close and she came willingly, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder like it had been carved specifically for that purpose. "Maybe belonging isn't about places," he said into her hair. "Maybe it's about people, moments, choosing to be present instead of running." "Is that what we're doing? Choosing to be present?" "I think so. I think I am." She lifted her head and her face was inches from his, close enough to see the individual flecks of gold in her dark eyes, close enough to feel her breath against his lips. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Of what? Of this. Of you. Of caring about something again. Because everything I've ever cared about I've lost, or left behind, or disappointed. Maybe I'll disappoint you too." "You probably will." She smiled sad and soft. "I'll probably disappoint you first." "Deal." He leaned forward. She leaned in. The gravity hiccuped. They jerked apart, floating for half a second before artificial weight reasserted itself. When they settled back into the normal physics of existence, the moment had fractured. Lyra laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the quiet cabin. "The universe has terrible timing," Owen said. "The universe is indifferent to our romantic tension." Apparently, but they stayed close, shoulders touching, watching the star cluster that might mean everything or nothing at all. Outside, the void remained infinite. Inside, the distance between them had become almost nothing. Week 11 arrived with a transmission that changed everything. Commander Moss called an all-hands briefing. 47 personnel crammed into the communal area standing room only. The air smelled like recycled anxiety. Federation Science Division is sending an automated probe to investigate an astronomical anomaly in Sector 14 Zeta, Moss announced without preamble. Arrives in 6 weeks. Pending results, this station may be upgraded to a research facility. The words landed like meteorites. Or, Moss continued, if the anomaly proves uninteresting, Outpost Zenith will be decommissioned. Crew reassignments to follow. Silence. Heavy enough to have mass. That's all. Dismissed. The crowd dispersed in a murmur of speculation and concern. Owen stood frozen, processing implications. 6 weeks. Their isolation had an expiration date. He found Lyra already back in cabin 17B, standing at the viewport, staring at the star cluster that had probably just sealed their fate. It's my fault, she said without turning. I logged observation notes in the system. Routine documentation. I didn't think anyone actually read those reports. It's not your fault. If they upgrade to research facility, this station will have hundreds of personnel, shifts, rotations, actual structure. Her voice was hollow. If they decommission, we scatter to different postings. Either way, this ends. Owen crossed to her, turned her to face him. This doesn't have to end. Everything ends, Owen. That's the only constant in the universe. Heat, death, and entropy, and nothing lasts. Then we make it last as long as we can. She looked at him with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. I filed for extension 4 months ago, she said quietly, before you arrived. When I thought I'd be alone here forever, and that seemed preferable to anywhere else, I requested another 18 months. Commander Moss approved it. Owen's heart did something complicated in his chest. You were planning to stay. I was planning to hide, Lyra corrected. There's a difference. Staying implies you have something worth staying for. I just had nothing worth leaving for. And now it's worse. She pulled away, pacing the small cabin like a trapped animal. Because now I have you. This, whatever we're building in this metal box in the middle of nowhere. And in 6 weeks, a probe is going to tell the Federation whether our nothing is interesting, and either way we lose this. We don't know that. I know statistics. I know probabilities. I know that good things don't last when you're people like us. People who run, people who hide, people who... Owen kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't elegant. His hands found her face and he kissed her like it was the only way to stop the words that were tearing her apart. She froze for half a second. Then she kissed him back, her hands fisted in his uniform. Her lips were soft and urgent and tasted faintly of the terrible tea from the spite machine. She made a sound in the back of her throat, something between surrender and relief. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lyra's eyes were wet. That was stupid, she whispered, monumentally. We're going to get hurt. Probably. I don't know how to do this, how to care about someone without destroying it. Neither do I. Owen's thumb traced the elegant point of her ear. She shivered. But maybe we figure it out together. 6 weeks, or 6 years, or however long we get. The probe might change everything. The probe might change nothing. Either way, we're here now. You're here, I'm here, that's enough. Lyra leaned her forehead against his eyes closed. I'm still terrified, she said. Me too. Good, at least we're terrified together. They stood like that, foreheads touching, breathing synchronized, while the station hummed around them and the universe spun on indifferent to their small human fears and smaller human hopes. 6 weeks, 42 days, 1,008 hours. It felt like both forever and not nearly enough. That night, Owen lay in his sleeping pod, staring at the ceiling, listening to Lyra's breathing 3 feet away. Lyra, when did you know what? That you wanted me to stay? That this was more than just coexistence? Silence. Long enough that Owen thought she'd fallen asleep. Then quietly, week 2, day 9. You made a joke about the existential crisis of the Fern, and I laughed. Actually laughed. First time in 14 months, I'd felt anything resembling joy. Or a pause. That's when I knew I was in trouble. Week 3 for me, Owen admitted. Day 17. You were humming at that ultrasonic frequency that makes my teeth hurt, and I realized I'd started to find it comforting, like a soundtrack to existing. That's when I knew. We're pathetic. Spectacularly. Owen, Otto, yeah. I'm glad you're here. Even if it ends badly, even if we only get 6 weeks, I'm glad. Owen's chest felt too small for his heart. Me too. Lyra's breathing deepened into sleep. Owen stayed awake watching the faint glow of status lights on the ceiling, thinking about probe trajectories and station decommissions, and the particular cruelty of finding exactly what you need right before losing it. Somewhere in the infinite dark outside their metal shell, the star cluster continued its geometric pattern, meaning everything or nothing. Existing without purpose beyond existing. Owen understood that feeling perfectly. He closed his eyes and let the station's hum carry him towards sleep. Lyra's presence 3 feet away, feeling both too far and exactly close enough. Tomorrow they'd have 41 days left. Tonight they had this moment. And maybe Owen thought as consciousness faded, maybe that was the only kind of forever that ever really mattered anyway. Week 13 arrived with the supply ship and a data packet that carried Owen's name. He was alone in the observation deck when the notification came through. Lyra had taken the early shift in the maintenance bay, giving him rare solitude among the flickering consoles and the infinite dark beyond the viewports. Transfer paperwork. The words sat on his screen like a verdict. Owen opened the file with hands that wanted to shake but refused to give them permission. 3 options laid out with bureaucratic efficiency: Titan Research Facility, Advanced Materials Development, Lead Engineering Position, the job he'd applied for 2 years ago, the career that had been closed to him after the ethics complaints and the walking away and the professional suicide he'd committed in the name of principles he wasn't sure he still believed in. They were offering it to him now. Redemption wrapped in a posting requisition. Earth Orbital Station Kepler. Comfortable. Close to home. Close to family he hadn't spoken to in 18 months because facing their disappointment felt harder than facing the void. Or extension. 18 additional months on Outpost Zenith, monitoring nothing, mattering to no one except the woman who'd somehow become his entire universe in the span of 16 weeks. Owen stared at the options until they stopped making sense. His console flickered. 17 minutes, right on schedule. He thought about Lyra, who could hear that power fluctuation like music, who had memorized the rhythm of this dying station and called it home. The observation deck door cycled open. Commander Moss entered, carrying 2 cups of something the spite machine had probably weaponized. "Thought you might need this," she said, setting 1 cup in front of him. Owen looked at the liquid. It was purple. He didn't ask. "You read the transfer options?" Moss said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Moinen. And I don't know what to do with them." Moss settled into the adjacent station, her movements economical. She'd spent 30 years in space. It showed in the way she inhabited zero-consequence environments like they were solid ground. "You saved this station during the hull breach," she said. "Quick thinking, solid execution under pressure. The right people noticed. This is your second chance, Blackwell. The career you thought you'd burned. They're handing it back. Why, Ray? Because competent engineers who actually give a damn about ethics are rarer than habitable planets." She sipped her purple beverage and grimaced. "Also because I wrote a hell of a recommendation." "You're welcome." Owen's throat felt tight. "What would you do, ma'am?" "I'd ask myself what I actually want, not what I think I should want, not what makes sense on paper. What do you want when you strip away the should and the supposed to and the expectations?" The question hung in the recycled air between them. Owen thought about Lyra's hand in his, the way she hummed in lower frequencies when she was content, the geometry of her smile. "That's what I thought," Moss said quietly. She stood, leaving her toxic beverage behind. "Decisions due before the supply ship leaves. You've got 18 hours. She paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Blackwell, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose the small life that makes us happy over the big life that makes us impressive." She left him alone with 3 options and 18 hours and a decision that felt like it would define everything that came after. Owen found Lyra in their cabin packing. Not her things, his. She'd organized his spare uniforms, his personal effects, the small tablet where he kept photos of Earth he pretended not to look at. Everything neatly arranged on his sleeping pod like a memorial to a presence that hadn't left yet, but soon would. "What are you doing?" His voice came out rougher than intended. She didn't turn around, didn't stop folding the shirt in her hands with precise mechanical movements. "Preparing," she said. "You got the transfer paperwork. I saw it in the system logs. Titan Research Facility. That's your dream, Owen. That's everything you wanted." "Lyra, don't." The word was sharp enough to draw blood. "Don't make this harder by pretending you're going to choose differently. I know how this works. I've seen it before. People come to places like this running from something. And when they get the chance to go back to their real lives, they take it. They always take it." Owen crossed to her, took the shirt from her hands, forced her to look at him. Her eyes were dry, but devastated. "You think I'm going to leave it," he said. "I think you should leave. I think you should take Titan and rebuild your career and become the person you were supposed to be before you got exiled to nowhere with someone like me. Someone like you. Someone who's forgotten how to exist anywhere but here. Someone who's losing her own language because she's been speaking yours for too long. Someone who can't give you anything except plants and terrible coffee and the privilege of monitoring empty space until we both go insane." Owen's hands found her face thumbs tracing the elegant points of her ears. She shivered. "You think that's all you are to me? I think I'm a stopgap. A comfortable fiction you're telling yourself because the alternative is admitting you're still hiding." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Owen stepped back. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe I am still hiding, but not from what you think." He moved to his personal terminal, pulled up his assignment records, the files he'd been avoiding for 13 weeks. "I need to show you something." The records told a story Owen had been rewriting in his head for 2 years. Transfer request, remote posting, deep space monitoring. Submitted by Owen Blackwell, dated 18 months prior. Not assigned, requested. Lyra read over his shoulder, her presence warm and solid behind him. "I don't understand," she said. "The Titan Weapons Project. When I walked away, when I filed the ethics complaints, I thought I was being brave, standing up for principles, refusing to compromise." Owen's voice was hollow. "But that's not what I was doing. I was terrified. Terrified of success. Terrified of the responsibility that comes with actually mattering. Terrified that if I took that project and succeeded, there'd be no more excuses for why my life wasn't everything I'd dreamed." He pulled up another file. His psychological evaluation. The one he'd never been meant to see. Subject demonstrates patterns of self-sabotage consistent with fear of achievement. Recommends therapeutic intervention through controlled environment with minimal performance pressure. "They didn't exile me," Owen said. "I exiled myself, and they just let me, gave me exactly what I asked for, a place where I couldn't fail because there was nothing to fail at." Lyra's hand found his shoulder, squeezed. "And then I showed up and ruined your perfect isolation." "No," he turned to face her. "Then you showed up, and I started understanding that maybe the problem wasn't the world expecting too much from me. Maybe the problem was me expecting too much from myself and this running when I couldn't deliver perfection." He reached past her, pulled up another file. Personnel request form, submitted by Lyra Venn, dated 4 months ago. Request human roommate assignment, specifically Owen Blackwell, if transfer approved. Lyra went very still. "You knew I was coming," Owen said. "You requested me. Specifically me." "I read your file," she admitted quietly. "Moss showed it to me when you were first flagged for transfer. Brilliant engineer, ethical to the point of self-destruction. Walked away from everything because you couldn't reconcile who you were with what they wanted you to be." She met his eyes. "You were me. Different species, different specialty, same pattern. And I thought maybe if I wasn't alone in it, it would hurt less." Owen felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, opening. "We're quite a pair," he said. "Catastrophically dysfunctional. Perfect for each other?" Lyra's laugh was wet. "That's the worst reasoning I've ever heard. I contain multitudes of bad reasoning. I've noticed." They stood in the small cabin, surrounded by half-packed belongings, and revealed truths and the accumulated weight of two people who'd been running from themselves until they collided in the middle of nowhere. "What are you going to do?" Lyra asked. "About the transfer." Owen looked at the options still glowing on his terminal. Titan, Earth, extension. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I know I need to decide for the right reasons. Not because I'm running, not because I'm hiding, but because I actually want it. And if what you want is Titan, then I go to Titan. And we end. Maybe, or maybe we figure out how to exist in different places and still choose each other. Long distance, visits, whatever it takes. Lyra shook her head. That's not how this works, Owen. I've seen relationships try to survive separation. They don't, especially when one person is growing and the other is stagnant. You're not stagnant. I'm forgetting my own language. I'm losing frequencies. I'm becoming less viridian and more just empty. Her voice broke. If you leave, at least one of us should get to be something. Owen pulled her close. She resisted for half a second, then collapsed into him like a structure finally surrendering to gravity. I don't want to lose you, she whispered into his chest. You won't. You don't know that. No, he agreed, I don't. But I know I'm done running from things because they might hurt. I'm done choosing safe failure over risky success. I'm done sabotaging myself. He tilted her face up, made her look at him. Whatever I decide, it won't be because I'm afraid. It'll be because I actually want it. Can you trust that? Lyra searched his face for a long moment. I can try, she said finally. It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. Week 15. The probe arrived. Owen and Lyra watched from the observation deck as the automated vessel established orbit around the star cluster. Sleek, efficient, bristling with sensors that would spend the next 72 hours analyzing the anomaly that had given their isolation an expiration date. 3 days, Lyra said. Then we know. Then we know, Owen echoed. They'd fallen into a strange holding pattern, not quite together, not quite apart, existing in the space between decision and consequence. Owen still hadn't submitted his transfer choice. The deadline had been extended by 48 hours due to probe analysis delay. The universe, it seemed, was giving him time to be certain. He spent those hours doing something he should have done months ago. He accessed the full archive of his Titan project work, the research he'd walked away from, the ethical concerns that had driven him to refuse participation. And he found something he hadn't expected. The weaponization protocols he'd objected to had been scrapped 6 months after his departure. New leadership, new direction. The technology had been repurposed for exactly what Owen had argued it should be used for: sustainable energy generation. Life support systems. Technology that saved rather than destroyed. His ethics complaints had mattered. His refusal had forced a reckoning. He'd thought he'd thrown away his career for nothing. Turned out he'd thrown it away for everything that mattered. The realization sat in his chest like a stone. Heavy but solid. Real. He found Lyra in the cabin talking to her plants in a language he couldn't understand. Viridian. The frequencies he couldn't hear but could feel in his bones when she spoke them. She'd been practicing, trying to remember, trying to hold on to the parts of herself she felt slipping away. The Titan project was repurposed, Owen said, after I left. They used it for exactly what I wanted. Life support, energy, good things. Lyra turned her expression carefully neutral. That's wonderful, Owen. I thought I'd failed, thought walking away meant nothing changed, but it did. It mattered. So you're going back. Not a question. An acceptance. I don't know. Owen sat on his sleeping pod, the decision still unmade. Part of me wants to see if I can do it right this time. Build something that matters. Be the person I was supposed to be. You should. Lyra's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she touched the fern that had finally grown strong under her care. You should go back and be brilliant and change things. That's what people like you do. What about people like you? People like me stay in places like this and tend plants and forget who we used to be until we're just echoes of potential we never lived up to. Owen crossed to her, took her hands, made her stop touching the plants and focus on him. You're not an echo. You're the most present person I've ever met. You hear 17 frequencies. You notice everything. You're brilliant and sharp, and you chose this place not because you're weak, but because you're brave enough to walk away from expectations that would have destroyed you. That's just pretty words for giving up. No, it's recognizing that success doesn't look the same for everyone. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose the life that makes you whole over the life that makes you impressive. Lyra's eyes were wet. Commander Moss said something similar, Owen continued, about choosing the small life that makes us happy over the big life that makes us impressive. And I think she's right. I think I've spent my whole life chasing impressive and ending up miserable. And now I think maybe I want to try happy, even if it's small, even if nobody else understands it. The words hung between them, fragile and enormous. The probe data comes back tomorrow, Lyra whispered. Then we'll know if this place even exists anymore. Then we'll know, Owen agreed. That night they slept in the same pod, not sleeping exactly, just holding each other while the station hummed and the probe analyzed and the future waited to reveal itself. Owen listened to Lyra's breathing, felt the flutter of her pulse against his palm, memorized the geometry of her presence. Whatever tomorrow brought, he'd have this. It felt like enough. Week 16, day 112. The probe data came back at 0800 station time. Commander Moss called another all-hands briefing. Owen and Lyra stood at the back, hands intertwined, waiting for the verdict that would define everything. Moss pulled up the analysis on the main display. The star cluster rendered in false color. Beautiful, geometric, precise, and completely utterly mundane. Gravitational lensing, Moss announced, caused by a rogue brown dwarf passing through the sector approximately 200 years ago, created an optical effect that makes random stellar distribution appear organized. No anomalous technology, no alien artifacts, no revolutionary physics. She paused, let the disappointment settle. Federation Science Division has declared the phenomenon interesting but not significant. Outpost Zenith will maintain current operations and staffing levels. No upgrade, no decommission. We continue monitoring, nothing exactly as before. Relief rippled through the assembled crew. Jobs saved, routines maintained, the comfortable certainty of purposeless existence. Moss dismissed them with a wave. Owen and Lyra stood frozen as the crowd dispersed around them. Nothing changes, Lyra said softly. We stay exactly as we are. Yeah. The isolation continues, the monitoring continues. Everything stays pointless and remote and forgotten. Yeah. She looked at him and her eyes held the question she couldn't quite ask. Owen pulled the transfer paperwork from his pocket. Physical printout. Old-fashioned. Concrete. He marked the third option. Extension, 18 months. Lyra's breath caught. That's the stupidest decision you have ever made, she whispered. I'm preemptively stupid. You filed for extension 4 months ago. I was running. You're not running anymore. You could go back. Be impressive, matter. Owen took her face in his hands, thumbs tracing the points of her ears. What if this is what mattering looks like? What if choosing you, choosing us, choosing to be happy in the middle of nowhere is the bravest thing I've ever done? We're going to monitor nothing. 10 plants. Slowly lose our minds together. Sounds perfect. Owen. He kissed her, soft and certain, and full of all the things he couldn't quite say yet, but felt in every atom of his being. When they broke apart, Lyra was crying, but she was smiling. Stay with me, she whispered. Choose this, choose me. Even though it's small and pointless and nobody else will understand. I already did, Owen said, showing her the marked paperwork. Submitted it 10 minutes ago. You decided before the probe data came back. I decided the moment I realized that potential isn't about what you could be. It's about what you actually want to become. They stood in the empty briefing room holding each other while the station hummed and the universe spun on indifferent and infinite. Later, Owen would submit his transfer extension officially. Lyra would be notified that her partnership request had been approved for another cycle. Commander Moss would sign off with a knowing smile and absolutely zero surprise. Later, the supply ship would depart, carrying personnel transfers and cargo, and Owen's rejection of everything he'd once thought defined success. But in that moment, they just stood together. Two people who'd run to the edge of everything and found that sometimes the most profound thing you can do is stop running. Choose presence. Choose connection. Choose the small, brave life over the big, empty one. The fern in their cabin had grown 3 new leaves. The spite machine had achieved full consciousness and started requesting its own maintenance schedules. The star cluster continued its beautiful, meaningless pattern against the infinite dark. And Owen Blackwell, who had once thought he'd failed at everything that mattered, finally understood what success actually looked like. It looked like Lyra's hand in his. It looked like monitoring nothing together and calling it purpose. It looked like home. 6 months later, Owen woke to Lyra's ultrasonic humming. The frequency that used to make his teeth hurt now felt like music, like the soundtrack to existence. She was watering plants, rearranging them by some pattern only she understood. The fern had grown strong, the existential crisis resolved through patience and care. Outside their viewport, the star cluster glowed, meaningless and beautiful. Owen's console would flicker in 17 minutes, right on schedule. They had 12 more months on their extension. After that, they'd decide again, stay or go, together or apart. But Owen suspected he already knew the answer. Some people measure success in achievements and accolades and impressive titles. Owen measured it in the geometry of Lyra's smile, in shared silence, in the choice to stop running and start living. The universe remained infinite and indifferent. But in one small metal cabin floating in the void, two people had found something the universe couldn't touch. Purpose, connection, home. And that Owen thought as Lyra turned to him with eyes that held everything he'd ever needed was enough. More than enough. It was everything.